Hey everybody, it's Bryan here with another tutorial. This will be part 2 in our Premiere series. In this one, we're going to start diving in. In the last tutorial, we covered all of the basics that I use to edit my cuts from starting to finish, including export. In this one, we're going to dive into a few techniques that I use to make my life easier in Premiere. That's going to include keyframing as well as using adjustment layers even further than we did before. So strap yourselves in and let's get started. Alright, so we're in Premiere now. We're going to do a really simple cut. This is not going to be as long as the first tutorial. Every tutorial here on out in the Premiere series is going to be nice and short and focusing on one particular topic. In this case, we're going to be covering how I use adjustment layers and keyframes. We're just going to walk through what keyframes are, how you can use them to push your edits over the edge, and we're going to go from there. So, let's go to get started. I imported some footage into my Premiere project. I have a new project going on. If you haven't, start one now. I'm just going to pull up some SL3 footage. So I used this shot in the last tutorial. It's this one right here. Now, a little bit about the shot. It's actually shot on a Canon Rebel SL3. I shot in 60 frames a second with a shutter speed of 1/120, which will give me a lot of room to work with. So we're just going to use this shot, and we're just going to break this down in the edit, and we're going to cover keyframes right off the bat. So before I add any adjustment layers, let's go into our effects panel, and let's talk about keyframes. Now, if you remember in the last video, I talked about the stopwatches being the keyframe selectors, essentially. You turn them on, you could set your keyframes. Another thing to know is if that stopwatch is on, in this case, these are already on, any changes I make will automatically set a keyframe. So I'm in the audio portion of this one, and I accidentally set a keyframe for -20. I'm going to set that to 0. And there's this little blue button that shows up now. It's usually gray, but because there's a keyframe there, it's blue. So in that case, I want to click it and turn it off. If I want to set a keyframe there at 0, I can just click and it sets that keyframe for me. If you can't see that through YouTube compression, let me slide over. I'll do another one here so you can see it. This is what a keyframe looks like. This is a linear keyframe. I'll cover what linear means in a few moments when we start to break down different types of keyframes, but that's how you set a keyframe. So for this clip right here, if you remember, I sped this footage up and then slowed it down into slow-mo. I'm going to show you guys how I do that. And this is a perfect way to start to break down a specific type of keyframe, which is the time remapping one. So if we come over here, I have speed set to 100% with a keyframe already on. I'm actually going to drop down the spinner here, like so. And it's going to bring this up. We have a line here now. There's no keyframe set, and we're at a velocity of 100 over a second. Basically, that's 100% per second, 100% of the speed. Now, what I want to do before I do anything so that I can show you how this works, I'm going to come up here to the sequence settings, and I want to switch this to 23.976. This is the NTSC format for 24 frames per second. Okay, so that's where we want to be. 1920 by 1080 is okay. Here we go. We have 23.976 time code because we set that working color space is 709, and that's fine. And let's hit OK. So our sequence has been set now. So I'm actually going to come to about right here. I only want to use here. I want to move that all the way over. You can just drag it over the way I did. I just double clicked in the negative space and then I used the alt backspace. So I'm gonna drag this over. And then so we're right here right now, and what I want to do is I want to slow-mo this footage using keyframes. So to do that, I'm going to set a keyframe here. You'll notice the keyframe this time looks different than the linear keyframe I talked about, and that's because we're able to spread the action of change over a long period of time. I wanted to cover this first because really this is the only time where you'll see this keyframe in Premiere. This is for specifically built for the time remap. And so we're actually covering time remap, and I'll walk this through in another tutorial at another time, but I wanted to cover this one first so that when we do the other keyframes later, it all makes sense. So what I want to do is I'm at 100%, but then since this is 60 frames a second, I want to slow this down to about 40%. So to do that, I'm just literally going to go over this line right here, and I'm going to drag down until this says 40. That's 50, and that's 40. There we go. Cool. So what'll happen now if we watch, I'm going to hit play, it's going to hit this point in my timeline, and it will slow down. There it goes. Now the audio doesn't change, so to keep it from being distracted, I'm just going to mute it. Boom, there you go. Now the audio doesn't change, but yeah, that's you know, you can't really slow down the audio here in this portion. We can actually, if we do it in a different way, we would cut, we use effects, but we're not going to do it for this tutorial. So, but the one thing I don't like about this keyframe is it's an instant hit. It's very linear. It goes from 100 to 40 right off the bat, and I don't like that. So what you can actually do, if you come up here, you'll notice there's a dotted line on the keyframe now. If I click on this side of the dotted line, the right side, and drag, I can drag out the keyframe. And now we have this, it's still linear. We have this fall off. You'll notice it hits a hard point right here, falls off, and hits a soft point, but it'll look better. And we'll slow down into the shot. Now it's not really framed very well. I don't think this is the exact shot that I had used last time, but at least you guys can see that. In fact, what I can do is if I drag this on, I drag, oops, this over. I can drag this over, bring this back. Cool. There we go. And you'll also notice that if I do this, and I highlight both keyframes and highlight over, there's these handles that come up. Now, if I come in here and click the handles and I turn them like so, it actually smoothens it out. It's hard to see over YouTube. I'll zoom in for you guys. But it actually smoothens out the curve. So now, there we go. Get that nice. Fall into a slow motion. I would cut already by this point because the camera angle gets really shaky. So that's one keyframe that we wanted to talk about. That's a time remap. I'm going to cover this in more detail in another video, but I thought you guys would like to know this. It's a nice little neat trick, and I knocked it out for you guys right away. For the rest of the keyframes, let's do it here. Let's close the time remap. Now, let's say I want this shot to fade on. Okay, what I can do is I have 100% opacity right here, which means the shot's 100% opaque, which means we see it all. But maybe I want it to come from black. And now in Premiere, your blank canvas is 9 out of 10 times going to be black, which means if there's nothing there, it's just going to show up as a black screen. So we'll just use that to our advantage. So I set this keyframe here a few seconds in, about a second in, full frame in. I'm going to come back to the very first frame, and I'm just going to drag with my mouse. I'm going to left click and drag all the way down to 0, and it's going to set that keyframe. Because remember, the stopwatch is on, it's going to automatically set a keyframe for you. And there you go. Okay, we now have a fade. It's a little weird. It's linear. So let's cover now what linear means. Okay, so linear is the velocity interpolation of the keyframe. Linear means it's going to be 0 to 1, 0 to 2, whatever the rate of speed. Okay, if I wanted to smoothen this out like I did with these keyframes down here in the time remap, there are two ways to do this. I can come in here and I can set one of my Bezier tools. 9 out of 10 times, they won't work the way you envisioned them to, and you'll have to go in and tweak them. But in this case, what I want to do is I just want to come in here, highlight both keyframes by clicking and dragging, right click. I'm going to hit ease in, right click again, and hit ease out. Now, if I zoom in here, and let's pull this up big on screen so you guys can see it, you'll notice that my keyframes now have this curve. Okay, this is not linear. Okay, this is very exponential, which means there's a mathematical operation that drives it. And I can modify these curves here on the sliders themselves inside the actual layer. Okay, now let's look at the difference, and you see it's nice and soft. It comes in and then it goes into that slow motion because it's there. So that is how you can set keyframes in After Effects. Now, if you remember my last tutorial as well, I talked about using adjustment layers. You can set keyframes on your adjustment layers, and those keyframes will directly affect the footage below it most of the time. There are some effects that do not translate down, and that's okay. But let's go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to create an adjustment layer. Let's drag that onto the top. I want to pull out, I'm going to zoom out here. That's a little too far. Just pull that over. I want to drag this one to the top. It's going to create a new track for me. And then I'm going to come over here to effects. I'm going to type in crop. This is a refresher from the last tutorial. This is how I convert to widescreen. The top, I'm going to do 13%. The bottom, I'm going to do 13%. So we get this nice little aspect ratio. And then I'm going to come down here. Now notice, I'm going to make a change in my motion. It's the position. I'm going to raise it up in the y-axis. But notice it doesn't set a keyframe because the stopwatch isn't on. Okay. There we go. I'm gonna use the adjustment layer here to set some more keyframes for us as well. So I don't want to do all my effects on this one adjustment layer. This is just the crop adjustment layer. So if we go back here to our project, we have it, the adjustment layer created there. We can use another one. I'm gonna put that one right over my footage, and here we go. Now, remember how I said most of your keyframes will translate below? If you're gonna use your motion keyframes on your adjustment layer, they will not translate. So for instance, if I come over here and I want to darken this plate, notice how it doesn't darken with the opacity going up and down. So what I actually have to do is I have to apply an effect here, okay? So let's come to effects, and there's a transform effect. If you type in transform, it's under distort, drag that there. And now I have pretty much the same things that show up here, they're now down here. But because this is an effect, it will directly cause change to all the footage below it. So let's say I have this going on here. I want to get rid of this. Let's bring this back up to 100. It already is. But I want to do the same effect that we did here with the opacity change, but I want it to affect all of my changes, right? So to do that, I come down here. I have the opacity in my effect, okay, in the transform effect. So let's lower it, and notice right off the bat it darkens it, but it doesn't set a keyframe. So now I have to come over here and hit the stopwatch. It'll automatically set the keyframe for me there. Let's come over a little bit, and then boom. And now it's directly affecting everything below it. Okay. And we can keyframe a whole bunch of things. Maybe I want to add some motion. So let's come over here. Let's say maybe I want to add a transition. We can do that in the transform node itself. We'll click a keyframe here for position, move over a little bit, and let's say I want to slide this off. Now, another thing of also a note too, in let's say position that has multiple variables in the linear keyframes, you'll right click here and you won't see easy ease in and easy ease out right away. And that's because you have different interpolations. You have spatial interpolation and temporal. In this case, we want to work in temporal interpolation, and we want to go easy ease in and easy ease out. This temporal is just a fancy way of saying time interpolation, and we want the change to be affected by time. So as time progresses, we want the change to increase or reduce, and that's what easy ease in and easy ease out does, or ease in, ease out does. Spatial works with itself, with the actual movements itself, the values here over time, okay? So, and there we go. We have the transform now. I'll just take that off. So we built in a little bit of a boom right there. Cool. So we have a lot of cool things happening. And there's a lot of different effects, plugins that you can use that'll come in that you can actually modify with keyframes what's going on. Let's say I want, at the very end, I want this to go off, but I also want it to motion blur a little bit. So then let's come in here. Let's type in direction for directional blur. Add that to the same adjustment layer down there. And I don't want directional blur here. So what I can do is I'm going to set a keyframe for both blur length and direction, because I may want to change the direction. Actually, let's not change the direction here. And so if you ever want to delete keyframes, it's going to bring up this prompt here. It's okay, just delete it. But I do want to increase the blur length right there to, let's say, 25. Okay, the direction's the wrong way. So now I just want to type in 90 here to get it horizontal. And then here's what's going to happen. So one thing has just occurred here that I should show you guys. Every now and then, your playback here is not going to work when you are adding effects and keyframes. To fix this, you have to set your ins and your outs. So I do that by pressing in, I for in, and O for out. And then I'm going to come up here, I'm going to hit sequence, render effects in to out. It's going to do its thing. It's done. Cool. And now I should be able to play. There you go. And it does that motion blur for us as it goes across. So we created that motion blur. Now this process of doing motion blur is very linear. I can't do like up and down, side to side movements at the same time. It's only one or the other, but it's one way to do it. Maybe I need to relax these keyframes from linear to more an exponential. So we're going to easy ease. Cool. There you go. So that's a really quick way to use keyframes, guys. I wanted this tutorial to be very short for you guys. I didn't want to do anything super long. So if you like this video, definitely let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions on how things are working, ask them, guys. I love to hear your feedback. Let me know if you like this video or if you don't. Please be sure to check out the rest of the content on my channel, guys. I just released a DaVinci color grading tutorial on how I color grade my drone footage. It was highly requested, so I released it. Definitely want to check that out. I'm going to leave a link for that right here in the video at the very end. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you get notified whenever I go live, and I'll see you in the next video.